Welcome to another lived history, a deep dive into one of the most complex and often forgotten pages of human history. Today, we will explore the daily lives of those who in ancient Rome were considered little more than objects, slaves. In the vast and brutal world of Rome, slavery was not a matter of race, but of circumstance. Anyone, regardless of origin, could be deprived of freedom and forced into servitude. The Roman Republic, fueled by relentless military expansion, saw entire populations enslaved as spoils of war. The outcome of the Third Punic War is a prime example. After the fall of Carthage, 50,000 Carthaginians were sold into slavery and their civilization was wiped out of existence. Roman generals, seeing captives as economic resources and political tools, flooded the markets with prisoners of war, ensuring that no conquered enemy remained unconquered. But war was not the only path to slavery. The Mediterranean, full of lawlessness, allowed piracy to thrive, with thousands of people kidnapped and sold into slavery. Strabo, a Greek geographer, describes how Cilician pirates terrorized coastal cities, kidnapping men, women, and children to sell in Roman markets. Even those who lived within the confines of Rome were not safe. Debtors unable to pay their debts could be enslaved, a fate foreseen by early Roman law. And for the unfortunate, birth itself was a prison. The Lex Alia Sentia decreed that a child born to a slave mother was also condemned to slavery. For the Romans, humans were commodities, bought, sold, and displayed like livestock. This was evident in the infamous slave markets of Delos, a major center of human trafficking in the Mediterranean. Ancient sources claim that, in its heyday, up to 10,000 slaves were sold in a single day. Many were prisoners of war, victims of piracy, or children born into slavery. Stripped of their identities, men, women, and children were auctioned off, examined like animals, and subjected to degrading scrutiny. Buyers demanded a full description of the slave's characteristics, but deception was widespread. Cicero writes of dishonest merchants who exaggerated a slave's skills or hid his illnesses to increase his price. The most desirable, Greek tutors, scribes, or artisans, were sold for exorbitant prices, while agricultural workers were auctioned off en masse. Many slaves were displayed naked, so that buyers could assess their strength or beauty, a practice confirmed by Strabo. Some bore marks or tattoos, identifying them as runaways or criminals. These markets were the gateway to a life of toil, punishment, or, for a very lucky few, the distant hope of freedom. But for the majority, the auction was the moment when they ceased to be considered human in the eyes of Rome. For a Roman slave, life was dictated by work. Relentless, brutal, relentless. Those destined for the latifundia of central Italy lived in the worst conditions. These immense agricultural estates, owned by the elite, relied on teams of slaves to grow grain, olives, and vines. Pliny the Elder writes that field slaves worked from dawn to dusk under the whip of overseers, often chained to prevent their escape. Malnourished and treated as disposable commodities, many died from exhaustion or punishment. Their lives were worth less than the tools they used. Urban slaves suffered different fates. Some were employed in the grueling construction of monuments such as the Colosseum under the Emperor Vespasian, where thousands of slaves transported blocks of travertine and dug foundations, often at the cost of their lives. Others served in patrician homes, performing tasks from the most humble to the most specialized: pedagogues, scribes, cooks. Rich families preferred Greek slaves, considered more refined. But even for them, no task was too humble, and disobedience was punished without hesitation. In Rome, a slave's life was ruled by fear. The law offered no protection. The master had absolute power over his fate. Any sign of defiance, or even an attitude perceived as insolent, could be punished with extreme violence. The most famous case is from 71 BC, after the Spartacus revolt, when 6,000 captured slaves were crucified along the Appian Way as a warning. A chilling scene. Rebellion meant death in the most atrocious way imaginable. Seneca the Younger writes that masters could kill their slaves without consequences, maintaining control through cruelty. Some were whipped daily, others were branded with iron collars, bearing the inscription Thug, Fugitivus. These collars often bore humiliating messages such as, "Hold me, I might escape." Runaway slaves, if captured, were mutilated, flogged, or thrown into the arena to fight wild beasts. The most frightening reality was that no amount of supplication could save them. Roman law recognized no right of appeal to them. They were property, not people. Their suffering was entertainment for some, a daily exercise of domination over others. In this world of total subjection, survival meant obedience, resistance, and the constant suppression of hope. For most Roman slaves, freedom was a distant but not impossible dream. Unlike other ancient societies, Rome had a well-established system of manumission, the legal process by which a slave could be freed. However, not all masters were willing to grant it, and even when they did, it was almost never an act of kindness. The Lex Fufia Caninia, introduced under Augustus, limited mass manumissions to prevent a growing class of freedmen from destabilizing the social order. Those who managed to be freed often attended a ceremony at the Temple of Feronia, where a magistrate officially sanctioned their freedom. Some were granted manumission as a reward for years of loyal service. Others bought it with money, saved from small tips or gifts. But even as freemen, they were rarely considered equal. They became freedmen, still bound to their former masters as clients, under an obligation of loyalty. Some, like Marcus Tullius Tiro, Cicero's former slave, succeeded, becoming scholars and writers. Tiro invented a system of shorthand, but for the majority, the struggle continued. Freedmen could not hold high political office and faced social prejudice. However, compared to the alternative, a life in chains, manumission was the only hope. That's all for today. And what do you think? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you are passionate about this historical curiosity, see you next time. Bye.